You're a few $100s short.
The devil half looked up from a stack of bills laid out on the counter, eyes resting on a man who could only gawk back in crippling terror. His round, fat face was dewy with sweat. Eyes popped, mouth gaped open like a pufferfish. This was the manager. What a joke.
It's all I have.
The man stammered. Dev nodded towards the register.
You mean to tell me that that's empty too?
The man gulped. He sank to his knees in a fluster, arms raised as though in prayer, the onset of tears forming in his eyes. It was the last-ditch effort of a man unprepared to lose his entire life savings. A man so used to his prestige he couldn't handle the thought of facing the other side. The side less green.
Please, 3 more days. That's all I ask.
Sad. He hadn't a shred of dignity. Dev faced away with a sigh.
Better pay up the next time I drop by. The older guys aren't as forgiving as I am, and I'm guessing you value your life.
Dev half turned, bidding farewell with a bone-chilling glance.
3 days. That's it.
Dev didn't wait to see the man get back onto his feet. Dev pocketed the cash, concealed in a brown paper bag, and charged out the door. The entire thing hadn't been a complete waste of time. These folks sure knew how to test him. Scowling to himself, he strode along the West Campbellton sidewalk, hands in his pockets. Filthy. Everything about this city was, even after street sweepers brushed it clean. Main Street was the East Side's dirty little secret, and its worst kept. But the West Side was even dirtier, inside and out, and not because of the way it looked. It was dirty because of its people. People like the groveling manager. Dev stole a glance at his watch. He pulled on his hood and ran, hoping to make it back in time. 15 minutes until the bell, the end of his 4th period spare and the start of his 5th period class. 15 minutes. Then he'd go from the devil half back to Ryu Debiru. Chapter 5. 4th period passed by, a haze of lectures and scribbles on a blackboard. Next thing Haruna knew, she was swaying into her final class of the day. It was 1:15 in the afternoon. They took turns reading aloud paragraphs from within their copies of Demystifying the Tales of Shakespeare, as Mr. Lee, their teacher, sat on his desk, leg over knee. He nodded, brows knit with strained focus as Arlen Cage slowly read to the end of page 52. Haruna stared at the page without registering meaning to the words, her chin in her hand as she tried her best not to fall asleep from boredom alone. She didn't enjoy listening to other people read, especially when they weren't very good and tripped hopelessly over their words the way Arlen did. She crooked her head away from the textbook and cringed. Without meaning to, she'd caught sight of Ryu from the corner of her eye. She sat in the middle and he was at the far end in the back. He wasn't looking into the book and following along like most others. He was gaping into space. Typical. Haruna shuddered and refocused her attention elsewhere. 5th period English was the only class Haruna shared with Ryu, one of the rare times she'd had the honor of sharing any classes with him since grade 7. The incident from hours prior, when he and his crew had attempted to humiliate her, was still raw in her mind like an open sore. Fortunately, he hadn't paid mind to her since. It was like nothing happened. But Haruna hadn't forgotten, especially not the way he had feigned hopefulness by picking up her inhaler, then practically pitching it, like the soulless hellspawn he was, to the floor. Haruna was thankful that at least Angelique and Gabrielle were in this class as well. She exchanged a warm smile with Gabrielle, who seemed to be in a much bubblier mood than she'd been at lunch. Angelique was smiling too. They hadn't had time to discuss it, but Haruna figured the whole Seth thing went well. Although Haruna was half curious as to what might have happened since she'd left, the other half of her didn't want to know. One of two things was sure to happen if her best friend and Seth started dating. They would be seeing less of her or more of Seth. Neither sounded like something to look forward to.
Excellent. Now we can move on. You may put away your textbooks,
Mr. Lee announced, springing off his desk and picking up a stack of papers that he passed on to the class row by row. Once the stack came her way, Haruna glimpsed the header that read midterm assignment before taking one and handing the rest to the person behind her. The 1st of November was just days away. It was that time of year, report card season. Haruna skimmed the assignment outline and 2 words struck her, sending her mind whirling like a roller coaster. Group activity. No.
I thought I would do something a little interesting this year,
Lee said as he paced the room, displaying a grin.
We spent a lot of time reviewing Shakespeare, the man, the writer. Now I would like for you to consider his works. What are the fundamental lessons? What can we take away? What did it mean for the time it was written? And how can we apply those lessons today? Within a group of 3, you will be assigned one of Shakespeare's greatest plays and create a presentation. The way you choose to present is up to you. You can do a slideshow, a skit, a news report. Be creative. Are we allowed to pick our groups?
Someone shouted without raising a hand.
No, this will be decided at random.
He lifted and waved a plastic cup for all to see. Haruna gaped at the paper. Be creative? Group assignments were the worst. She was always put into a group that left her to do all the work, fighting to somehow pull off a passing grade. A pass wasn't anywhere near good enough either. It didn't help that they all went home with the same grade because of some crazy talk about group cohesion, no matter how much work she was forced to take on single-handedly. How was she supposed to be valedictorian after that? And this time she wouldn't even have the luxury of choosing who to share her suffering with? "So this is replacing our midterm exam?" asked Angelique. The teacher gave a short nod, arms folded across his narrow frame. Haruna skimmed frantically through the paper to see where it had mentioned this. Several students hooted. The excited exclamations of "yes!" and high fives reverberated through the class. Why were they celebrating? No exam? Why not? Exams were her specialty. Haruna shot an arm into the air, flailing impatiently. "Mr. Lee, can I write an exam instead?" Lee quirked an eyebrow.
No. Like I said, this is replacing the usual exam. For everyone.
"Then can I opt out? Please? I ask that I may be allowed to opt out."
There is no opt-out option, Miss Mitsukai. Everyone. No exceptions.
Haruna glanced at her friends, seeing the looks in their eyes. They seemed only mildly disappointed. Not Haruna, though. Haruna was anxious. If at the very least she could be grouped with her friends, it wouldn't be so bad, right? And there were at least 4 other top performers in their class. There was hope. Her eyes darted across the room as the cup passed among the others and they drew from it. After 5 or so minutes, it returned to the teacher emptied.
Raise your hand when I call your play, Mr. Lee said, eyes gleaming. Much Ado About Nothing? Okay, Josh, Alyssa, and Sandeep. Good, our first group.
Haruna felt her brow twitch. Alyssa was super smart. That was 1 gone. She swallowed hard. Okay, 5 more viable options left.
Romeo and Juliet?
Haruna's heart sank as she watched Gabrielle and Angelique raise their hands, along with another girl. They had been sorted into a group with each other? She bit her bottom lip as she listened to one more play get called, watching yet another genius raise their hand. She felt her insides writhe with dread.
Okay, now, Merchant of Venice.
Shakily, Haruna lifted her arm. She scanned the room as the others looked ponderously back at her. None of them raised their hands. Trevor O'Connell? Emma Abbott? The last 2 class geniuses still ungrouped? Why weren't they raising their hands? Why? Haruna turned her head rigidly, feeling her bones had alchemized into lead, her still raised arm growing weightier as she peeked owlishly over her shoulder. No one else had raised their hand, which could only mean no one else was assigned the play. Haruna felt her spirits lighten, relieved, but confused. Had a miracle happened? Could it be that she was in a group all by herself?
Ahem, Merchant of Venice, Mr. Lee repeated. Oh, yeah, sorry. Wasn't paying attention.
Haruna whipped around, her face flushed. Ryu's arm hovered upwards. He regarded the teacher lazily before his eyes shifted and glanced back at her. Okay, said Mr. Lee, marking the names on line paper attached to his clipboard. Ryu and Haruna will be working on the Merchant of Venice. Haruna flew out of her seat, and her chair slammed on the floor with a clang that caused others to jump and stare.
A problem, Haruna?
You said it was a group of 3, she said, keeping her voice steady and soft. No, this argument isn't good enough. The gears in her mind spun into overdrive as she contemplated better excuses to talk her way out of this nightmare. Lee's eyes dropped to his clipboard. Yes. Well, it looks like there will be 4 groups of 3 and 1 group of 2. Haruna's lip quivered. She had no excuses. She was in full panic mode now. Mr. Lee, I can't be in a group with him. We don't work well together.
I'm sorry, the groups will not be changed.
But Mr. Lee!
I find this behavior rather unbecoming, Haruna. Might I suggest you simply learn to work together? Keep in mind this is worth 25% of your grade. Now take a seat. There will be no more interruptions.
Haruna picked up her chair and plunged into it. Her queasiness intensified. A major assignment that was one-on-one with Ryu. This meant they'd have to talk to each other, work with each other, breathe the same air even, or see each other beyond the random encounters in the hallways. Horrified, Haruna didn't hear as the teacher confirmed the last play with the remaining students. Didn't see or notice the concerned glimpses of her friends in her direction. She just barely heard the closing words.
You have 10 minutes until the bell. You may get with your groups.
Mr. Lee's eyes were on Haruna as he emphasized,
Or partners, and discuss your assignments. It'll be due in 3 weeks. There will be
no extensions, and you will not be given class time to work on this, so plan well.
Haruna didn't will herself to move. Her fingers gripped around a pen in one hand, the other hand clawing at a textbook while the scraping of chair legs and footsteps echoed around her. Slowly, she turned. Ryu remained slumped back in his chair, idly spinning a pencil like a compass arrow at his desk. So, she really had no choice then? Haruna lifted herself to her feet. Nose in the air, she moved to the back of the class, to the now empty desk in front of Ryu. Well, we're in a group. I know neither of us wants this, but I guess we should look past our differences for this assignment. Agreed? Silence. Ryu was still faced away. She could see several silver hoops shining in his right ear. She watched with disdain as Ryu glimpsed at his watch, then gave into an exaggerated yawn. Haruna's lips tightened. She wasn't about to let him test her. Not this time. Anyway, I'm thinking we can do a standard slideshow with PowerPoint. I've already read this play. Looking at the themes is the best way to analyze it, but instead, why not do something different? Like, instead of revenge, how about good and evil?
Oh, is that the way?
Ugh. She swept back her bangs and decided to ignore his sarcasm. With the good and evil theme, we can see that Shylock is clearly evil. That could be a starting point to work from. Ryu twitched.
Really? Because I'd actually say it's society that's evil.
Haruna's brows shot up. Are you kidding? Of course Shylock is the evil one. What kind of deranged psycho demands a pound of flesh? As the story went, Shylock the moneylender was unapologetically vengeful. He'd lent money to his hated enemy Antonio, demanding a pound of his flesh should he be unable to pay him back. Undoubtedly, Haruna reasoned, anyone, even a smug idiot like Ryu, should see that only an insane, incredibly evil person would suggest such a thing. He scoffed and crossed his arms.
So what? They signed the contract, didn't they? If Antonio was dumb enough to agree to it, too bad. Like Shylock says, a bond is a bond. If anything, Antonio was a hypocrite and the law is evil for taking his side.
By now, Haruna was convinced Ryu must have been satanic for real, practicing weird rituals at home, uttering incantations and sacrificing kittens. What a freak! Well, it was either that or all that weed had completely addled his brain. She rolled her eyes. Yeah, of course you'd say something like that, but this isn't about whatever you're into, it's about this play. Good and evil, and Shylock represents evil. Haruna folded her arms, matching him. Following his blank stare, Ryu's lips tugged into a half-smile that morphed into a laugh. Haruna glowered. She'd never heard or seen him laugh, but now he was laughing at her. After throwing his head back once, he lowered it and leered.
What I'm into? Oh man, I'm sorry, I thought you were supposed to be smart.
Pardon?
You heard me. If you've concluded that based on one stupid line in the play, then you've missed the entire point.
I missed the point? Well, you know what? Screw you. A boy who never speaks in class and doesn't even study, acting like he actually knows something? Ryu was unfazed, his sneering face appearing only further amused.
And that's just the response I'd expect from a girl like you. Pretending to be some model student, meanwhile a total drama queen, fake as those stupid fake contacts you're wearing. Yep, the Academy's finest over here.
Haruna shot to her feet, ignoring the curious glances of surrounding students. You're scum, Debiru. Why don't you just drop out already? It would do our school a favor. Ryu's face was expressionless, if only for a moment, and the smirk faded merely to be traded in for a deep frown. Haruna felt her inner fire fizzle into vapors. He rose from his seat just as she had, and though he wasn't very tall, he was without a doubt taller and more intimidating than she was. It was happening. Again.
Oh, what's this? You're name-calling now? Dropping out would be a favor to who, Haruna? Do you mean the whole school or just yourself?
His tone was chilling, enough to rival his facial expression. She'd never heard him say her name before. It was like venom oozing off his tongue.
I know you're terrified of me, because I'm not afraid to call all of you out on your...
Ryu stopped as Haruna stepped back, backing into her chair in a way that caused it to screech against the floor. His eyes shifted overhead. The room was much quieter, and she wondered if this meant that others were staring. Then the bell rang. The class was over, but Haruna remained paralyzed, stock still, just as she had been when he had walked away from her in the hallway. His eyes shifted back to her, narrowed. He grumbled under his breath.
Never mind. I don't care. Screw you.
Her own words echoed back to her. The words stung. Amid the unease that followed, Haruna registered that the room was emptying. Eyes lowered, she snatched up her books and took off. She didn't pause, didn't look back, didn't take notice of her friends waiting for her in the hall as she breezed by them. Haruna had made up her mind. She would not tolerate anything. Not the words, not the attitude, not any of the intimidation tactics of that conceited dolt. Even if it meant working on her own, she would do it. Mr. Lee would just have to accept the fact that they didn't work well together.